Up next, I'd like to ask Doug Thomas, representing Humanism, to present his introductory remarks.
Good morning, Mr. Chairperson, fellow delegates, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens. My job is to explain the agnostic, atheist, and humanist philosophies in 3 minutes flat. Listen carefully, we can't do this all day. The term agnostic was coined by Thomas Huxley in 1869 to describe the philosophy that requires empirical evidence, scientific or historical, to consider something to be true. As part of that philosophy, agnostics are comfortable not knowing things that are unknowable and do not fill in the gaps with speculation or beliefs. Agnostics are curious and consider imagination as a path to useful hypotheses or starting points for discovery. I have met two kinds of atheists in my life. The first is the traditional atheist, and the second is what I call the postmodern atheist. Traditional atheists say there is no God, and immediately run into the agnostic objection that without evidence, they cannot prove that idea any more than theists can prove that there is a God. Postmodern atheists say, I don't believe in God, and avoid any comment from agnostics. In fact, as non-believers, agnostics are postmodern atheists by default. Humanism is relative, and that is the absolute truth. On this scale, someone who follows a plan by a supreme being without accepting any responsibility exhibits zero humanism. Michelle Bachmann managed this when she resigned from the Republican leadership campaign a couple of years ago without taking any responsibility for her actions, by claiming it was all God's plan. She'd be a good candidate for our Senate. Most people fall into the middle of this scale, accepting some responsibility for their own actions, albeit within the framework of their God's plan. These people exhibit some degree of humanism, then. Atheists, whether they are members of humanist group or not, fall on the right side of this scale and exhibit secular or absolute humanism. I actually like the term perfect humanism myself, and as soon as I get that past my wife, I'll get back to you. Humanists are good without gods. By using reason to balance other traits like tribalism and the dopamine response, we make socially constructive choices. We do accept the concept of religious freedom, as long as it includes freedom from religion. But that's for this afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, fellow delegates, and fellow citizens. My task this afternoon is to inform you about how our founders or philosophers feel about religious freedom. Now, the founders of humanism are quite different from other founders in religion in at least two major ways. First, they are not regarded as superhuman or divine. And second, they all move away from religion and advocate for freedom of thought and freedom from religion. To start, deciding who the founders are is difficult. One local humanist pointed out to me that humanism is refounded with each generation. One can go back to Thales, a Greek philosopher circa 625 BCE, who confronted the official mythos concept that gods gave human beings all their knowledge by pointing out that human beings are capable of learning things on their own. One can also talk about Epicurus, Democritus, and many other philosophers through the ages who struggled to achieve freedom from religion, often paying with their lives. During the Renaissance, men such as Erasmus of Rotterdam attempted to advance the legitimacy of free thinking from within the Roman Church. Later, men like Thomas Huxley, who defined the agnostic philosophy and coined its name in 1869, braved censure for their ideas while they sought freedom from religion. Huxley pointed out that without empirical evidence, one could not decide what is true in metaphysical terms. We agnostics follow the definition of our philosophy to do this to this day by requiring empirical evidence, either scientific or historical, to test the truth of any idea. This means that we do not share the beliefs of theists and are therefore postmodern atheists. However, it does not preclude us our respect for people's right to believe. The history of humanism in Canada begins with the immigration of Charles Watts and his wife, Kate Eunice, in 1883. They addressed resident humanists and secularists advocating for freedom from religion, but did not really start a movement, since to do so would have resulted in considerable censure. They did not speak out against the existence of religion, but rather spoke of the right to freedom from belief. Humanism as a movement in Canada did not start until the middle of the 20th century, when Drs. Ernest Poser, Dr. Maria Jyotirkar, and Dr. R.K. Mishra started the Humanist Fellowship of Montreal under the patronage of Lord Bertrand Russell and Dr. Brock Chisholm, a Canadian non-believer and the first director of the World Health Organization. This fellowship was replaced by the Humanist Association of Canada in 1968, founded by Dr. Henry Morgentaler and Dr. Robert Buckman. This association was founded on the premise that we can be good without God and that freedom from religion is a fundamental right. You will note that none of these Canadian humanists centered their philosophy on venerating any individual. Rather, they used reason to formulate ethics and referred to earlier philosophers as touchstones to philosophy. They all coexisted with religion. Now there are humanist organizations across Canada, including the Society of Ontario Freethinkers and Secular Connexion Séculaire. These are distinct from church organizations because they hold no top-down dogma and hold no belief. For example, the Society of Ontario Freethinkers, or SOFRE, is an atheist social network promoting humanist principles, free thought, critical thinking, and separation of church and state, which we believe protects religion from the state and the state from religion. Most of SOFRE's energy is spent supporting local non-believers through common life crises, facilitating marriage through humanist officiants, and providing support during bereavement. We also offer public lectures on topics such as the secret power of Canadian juries, a presentation delivered by Gary Boslaw recently in a branch of the Kitchener Public Library. Such lectures are intended as our contribution to social dialogue. As a registered charity, SOFRE is constrained from lobbying governments for changes in legislation, but keeps its members informed of issues involving humanist rights. Secular Connexion Séculaire, SCS, on the other hand, is an outright advocate for humanist rights, including the right to freedom from religion in Canada's laws, symbols, and government practices. SCS actively pursues the Office of Religious Freedom to do more on behalf of atheists in countries that persecute and even execute them. Please remember that no fewer than 11 countries outlaw atheists completely. That includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, the worst offenders. At the same time, SCS supports the right to religious freedom in all countries and is ready to ally with any group at any time to advance the cause of religious freedom, as long as that includes freedom from religion as well as freedom of religion. SCS is also forming alliances with Farewell Foundation and Dying with Dignity, both organizations that work to legalize assisted suicide in Canada. Humanists understand that human beings have the right to live with dignity and to complete their lives with dignity when they choose. Laws that prohibit the right to make end-of-life decisions freely for oneself are just ways to impose the belief of some on many. This breaks one of the fundamental principles of human rights in Canada. Freedoms are limited by the requirement not to interfere with other people's rights. A legal breakthrough for the right to freedom from religion came in the Supreme Court of Canada's decision in the Big M Drug versus Regina case in 1984. That court, in overturning New Brunswick Lord's Day Act, noted that fundamental freedoms guaranteed by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Clauses 2A, the right to freedom of conscience and religion, and in Clause 2B, the right to freedom of personal philosophy, protect the right of freedom from religion just as much as they protect the right to freedom of religion. Individual humanists also enjoy success in advancing the cause of freedom from religion. In a recent decision, the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario decided that, in spite of the Niagara District School Board's policy to the contrary, humanist René Chouinard had just as much right to distribute humanist literature to school children as did the Gideon Society to distribute Bibles. A Secular Connection Séculaire member is waiting for a hearing before the same tribunal regarding the imposition of religion on attendees at Peterborough Council meetings through the continued recitation of the Lord's Prayer. This hearing could have been avoided if people on the council had just held a moment of silence to start the meeting. That elegant little solution gives people a moment to gather their thoughts and focus on the matters at hand. People who choose to do that by praying silently can do so without interfering with the right to freedom from religion. As you can see, we're kind of on the other side of the coin here. While we're prepared to defend the right to freedom of religion, we often find that our freedom from religion gets left out of the phrase. The practice of freedom of religion, then, is no problem for us, humanists. We do not oppose religions, nor do we attack religious institutions when they do what they should be doing, practicing their religion. We speak out vigorously when religions allow any abuse of the rights of our fellow human beings within their following or outside it, or when they attempt to impose religion on us, thus limiting our right to freedom from religion. We have no problem with seeing nativity scenes on church lawns as we walk down public sidewalks, or seeing people wearing personal symbols of belief. Fortunately, my recessive diplomacy gene kicks in so that I don't actually send out thank you cards to local Christian churches for erecting decorated winter solstice trees in their churches and on the public squares of our cities. We share many symbols and many concepts, people. We are not here to challenge your religious beliefs. Rather, we are here to increase your understanding of our philosophy, being good without gods. Now, we are free thinkers, and while I sometimes find it necessary to remind some of our members that free thinking means freedom of thought, not freedom from thought, we hold reason to be the strongest way to develop ethics and to understand the universe around us. As a result of that free thinking, lively discussions occur among us on such topics as the Charter of Quebec values. Some of us can see justification for controlling the presence of religious symbols amongst public servants, while others of us find serious problems with that approach to secularism. We are united in our conviction that democracy through the ballot box and through the court system will prevail. However, human rights cannot be determined by population majority. If that were the case, atheists in this country would be entitled to roughly 5 times the human rights of Jews or Muslims, and about 1/3 of the rights of Christians. Both ridiculous propositions, to be sure. We are consistent in our philosophy that in a multicultural society like Canada's, we must all have an equal place at the figurative table where egalitarian social practices and laws are formulated. For such equality to be complete, laws that limit the rights of all Canadians because some Canadians hold a particular religion or philosophy must be expunged from our books. Clause 264 of the Ontario Education Act, with its admonition that teachers must teach the tenets of Christianity, is a glaring example of such legislation. Fortunately, Ontario teachers have the professional fortitude and wisdom to ignore the clause and to teach positive moral values that are acceptable to all Canadians. They do so through example as much as through lessons. To remove this clause would support them in their efforts. Consistent with our live and let live philosophy, we see open secularism as a way to preserve freedom of religion and to enhance freedom from religion. This concept, as I've said many times, centers on the idea that public institutions, our schools, our courts, our council chambers, our legislative assemblies, and our parliament must be free of religious symbols, religious policies, and yes, the religious clauses that exist in some of our current legislation. We are then unexpected defenders of freedom of religion. We are also seekers of true freedom from religion. We intend to continue the reasoned pursuit of that freedom through positive social and legal action. Thank you.